How would you describe your music to someone who hasn't heard it yet?
I guess my voice is very influenced by soul music and R&B music. Um, I grew up on artists like Sam Cooke and Otis Redding and Marvin Gaye and those sort of singers. But my music, I would just say it's pop. It's that's very broad, But there's influence of hip hop. My next album has some rappers on it, and with some me writing and singing the hooks and stuff. Kind of like Battle Scars. I don't know if you've heard Battle Scars, but it's a song featuring Lupe Fiasco. So there's stuff that is like that. Then there's stuff which is kind of a little bit, dance meets pop folk sort of stuff. I mean, a little bit of Avicii-like, a little bit, but maybe a little more folky. So it's less kind of super electronic and maybe a little more organic. Like it's still dance, but more four on the floor, organic. Using a lot of real instruments and yeah. I think that's how there's definitely a mix. I love big up tempo, happy tunes, but then I love emotional, more darker and deeper, ballads and stuff.
Which songs of yours that you've written are extremely dear to you, like you keep close to heart, and why?
There's a song called Get Along, which I wrote on my last album, which is quite dear to me. I think I wrote it at a time when I guess my world was being rocked. I just found out I was about to have a child, and it was planned and everything, but you can still never plan for it. And I remember as this kid was coming, I was starting to freak out about the world that he was going to inherit. It is a world where there's a lot of crazy things happening. Every time you turn on the TV or read the news, there's something that's just so hard to comprehend that it's happening in the world. So I wrote a song called Get Along, which is basically my heart's wish or a heart's cry, I guess, for a world where people, regardless of where they're from, what religion they are, or sexuality, or colour, or race, or whatever it is, they can just learn to love the human behind that, and people don't have to fight and judge, so that's basically what it's about. There's a lyric in that song that says, "It's easy if they're faceless to hate the other side." And I remember writing that and feeling, I don't know, I was quite emotional writing that line because it very much encapsulates what the song is about. Like when someone has a face to you, like I've met you guys now, and you could write something nice or you could write something nasty, but I would still find it hard to hate you because I've met you. You're a face to me. You're not just a journalist or something that I don't know, but you have a face to me now, and it's so much harder to hate somebody when you've met them, when you've spent time with them or whatever. So that's what the song's about. As an artist, when you embark on writing an album, it might be years later, and for me it's a couple of years after I released my last album. So obviously in that time, the scope of music has changed and the music industry has changed, the sound has changed, what they play on radio has changed. So naturally what influences me musically has changed. And so I've been listening to a lot of dance stuff and there's been a lot of folk, there's been so many different movements, and there's been this huge country folk sort of movements with people like Mumford and Sons and all these great bands, the Lumineers, and people who have really made it on a pop level. And then of course you've got the dance thing, and naturally those two worlds were going to meet at some point, and that's what's happening with a lot of the Avicii stuff and Guetta, and a lot of people are using real songs and sometimes quite folky country songs, and they're producing it with a dance beat. And so I guess for me, when I was writing my album, I was writing songs, and then suddenly I actually didn't want to do the dance thing. But then when I put that production on a song that I'd written or whatever, it's so hard to go back from that because it just sounds like it, you know, like it's made for radio or whatever. And so, yeah, I guess it's just a natural progression. That's why the sound has changed a bit because music has changed and I had to, you know, I've naturally changed with it.
So you mentioned that you actually are interested in Bollywood and gospel music. Are you intending to bring that unique touch to your future songs? I think people in Asia would really love to hear that.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think, so what you said, Bollywood?
Bollywood and gospel.
And gospel. Well, gospel, I grew up on gospel music. Whatever I do, it's always going to have, I'm always going to sing in a gospel sort of soul sort of way because that's just how I learned to sing. And, Bollywood, my mum, it's funny because I was born in Malaysia, but my dad met my mum in India. But if you looked at my mum, you probably wouldn't guess she's Indian because she's white with blue eyes, you know, and she's very fair. I think she might have some Indian somewhere, but mainly she's English and Scottish. Sorry, Scottish and Irish, and but you know, blue eyes, and but she speaks with this like Indian accent, and we moved to Australia when I was 6. My mum would come to pick me up from school, sometimes in a full sari with the puttu and everything in the middle, and my friends were like, "Dude, what's with your mum dressing up like Indian?" And I'm like, she's actually Indian. She doesn't look Indian, but she's Indian. And but she speaks fluent Hindi, and she would always watch. My mum is so dramatic as a person, and I think a lot of Indian women who grow up watching Bollywood movies are naturally dramatic. Have you ever seen a Bollywood movie? They are so dramatic. You know, it's like, you know, it's hilarious. And so I grew up watching Bollywood movies, and you'd see all the dancing and all that sort of stuff. But I always loved the music, and I've never really done any sort of Bollywood-ish type song, but maybe I will in the future. I'll get my mum to help me.
What would be the toughest challenge you face all throughout your career?
The toughest challenge? I mean, there's been a lot of personal challenges, but I guess on a career level, it's really just it's the moments where things don't go your way. You know, as a songwriter, sometimes you write a bunch of songs, and when you're in the studio and I'm putting down all the different drums and like you're like, this is a smash, this is a hit, I love this is going to be great, and you release it and no one cares, right? And then sometimes you write a song and you're like, oh, it's all right, and it ends up being this huge hit, you know. So you can never predict it. But you know, a few years ago there was a time where I was creatively just dry, done. I wasn't coping well with the pressure of being in public limelight and all that sort of stuff. And I moved quite far away. I bought this house and moved quite far away out of the city, out of Sydney. And I kind of just was a bit of a hermit there, and you know, my record label, I had people in my record label saying, oh, you're going to be dropped and this and that, because, you know, like I did one album that didn't do very well, and then I was doing this other album that I just couldn't finish because I just didn't like it, and people were saying, oh, you're going to be dropped and you're going to be this and that, and I guess I had some pretty nasty people in my life that were saying certain things, and they just really, those words really got to me. Failure, you know, has been this and that, and people were saying stuff to me that I took them on board, all of those words, and so my self-esteem was just rock bottom. And I think that was the toughest time in my career. I literally thought my record label were going to drop me, and that was it. And then I released this one album that did really well for me, and then suddenly I started writing again. I wrote a song called Like That or something, and that was a big success. And then I wrote another song called Who's That Girl, and then Battle Scars, and I was very lucky because I kept writing these songs and kept getting airplay. Anyway, and so I ended up kind of digging my way out of it, but it was a tough time.
I can take the last two questions from the
So after having done so many albums and performed in multiple shows, do you still get stage fright? And what do you do before a show? How do you calm yourself down?
I don't think there's nothing I can do to calm myself, because sometimes when you try and calm yourself, you're working yourself up. Because you're like, just calm down, you know. But I think I can never get used to it. Like those moments are probably the most nerve-wracking moments when I'm performing for people or doing things that I never dreamt of doing. You know, like in the last few years, Oprah was in Australia. I performed twice for Oprah. Like she was on stage with me, with an arm around me, like singing for an hour, both times, and it was amazing. Like Oprah on stage with me, and then you know, I performed on Letterman and Jimmy Fallon and Conan and all those sort of things, and like David Letterman's talking to me like, what? You know, like they're things that I always dreamt of. And then, but in recent times, probably Beyonce. I think that's probably one of the most nervous I was. That like I was a judge on the X Factor in Australia, and I had Beyonce as my guest judge. So literally we were on a couch, this little 2-seater couch, and like her butt was kind of touching my leg, just sitting right next to me for a whole day. A whole day. So I'm talking like in between filming, I'm like, so whereabouts in New York do you and Jamie? What do you guys do? Like I'm small talking with Beyonce. What do you say to her? Except you're perfect, you know. In real life, her skin and just her in real life, she is. It's like she's a painting. She's just a wax model. She's so flawless. But that was pretty amazing. She was very beautiful. Yeah.
Maybe you can share with us experience in working with Chris Lawrence.
Yeah. It's funny because Chris Lawrence, he's a French guy. He's a producer, really nice guy. And I remember writing with him years ago. And basically, Chris will make a track, and then I'll write the lyrics and the melodies and stuff to it. And I remember coming into this session, the first time we worked together, I wrote one of the worst songs I've ever written. It was a terrible song. It was called Maniac or something. And it was just a terrible song. So then I was writing with him again for this song, Like a Drum. But, you know, I was going into the studio thinking, this guy, he must think I'm a terrible songwriter. He must think that, like, from the crap song that we wrote last time, he surely, because, you know, I know that there's some things in my schedule sometimes where I'm like, oh, this is going to be painful. I thought Chris would be thinking that of me. And then, but then Like a Drum came out. So I think I redeemed myself a little bit as a songwriter because it wasn't quite as bad as the first song we wrote. But he's a really nice guy.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Awesome, my pleasure. Thank you.